Hi everybody. So, are you familiar with the term FOB?
Yeah.
Can anybody tell me what it stands for? Allie.
Fresh off the boat.
Yep. Glad you remembered from last time. So, if you're unfamiliar with the slang and specifically how it's used, fresh off the boat basically, describes somebody generally of Asian descent in a derogatory way because you sort of get the sense that somebody doesn't necessarily understand this person's cultural practices and they may appear foreign to their peers at school or in their neighborhoods. But how much do we really know about these people who are fresh off the boat and their experiences? Asian Americans represent a critical part of our school community, almost 30% of the student body. And Asian Americans are actually the fastest growing immigrant group in the United States. In the next 50 years, in 2065, they're expected to surpass the Latino demographic in terms of population, and you'll be able to see that the Asian American demographic in the United States has an increasing amount of political sway. But we don't really know that much about the Asian American demographic. Now is the perfect time to begin looking at those experiences. Not only immigrant stories, but also their dreams and their aspirations, because that's how we understand people. And what better lens do we have than the students and our peers, like the students of Boston Latin School, who are our peers. For now, we'll be focusing on students who are Chinese American, but we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that a little bit later. We'll first take a look at students' family histories and their immigration stories, getting to know a little bit more about their backgrounds. Then we'll look at their dreams and aspirations, and these two things are basically the focus of my capstone project, which is going to be a documentary that showcases these students' stories. Finally, we'll move on to how Chinese American immigration fits into the larger picture, and we'll give it a little bit of context so that we don't have to rely on just the experience of Chinese Americans to talk about all Asian American experiences. So, many students deal with discrimination and alienation as they come to the United States. They have a really tough time acculturating because the cultural differences between, let's say, their families and the United States, their peers, their communities at school, in their neighborhoods, there's a strong difference there. And discrimination for Asian American students can come from any number of angles. So I've spoken with students who basically have struggled, with having none of their peers really understand their immigration history or their cultural history, or if they're girls growing up as Asian American students, they've had to face a lot of overt sexualization by the media, or on the other hand, like the absence of sexualization, that sort of polarity in their portrayal by the media. Or I've had biracial students talk to me about their experiences, not really fitting into the Asian American community at school because they look white, but in the end, they identify strongly culturally with, being Asian American or being Chinese. Many also struggle to communicate with their parents and face extreme difficulties communicating cultural ideas and more abstract concepts to their parents. And what that means is that a lot of relationships between child and parent can become strained in those families. And these diverse experiences, these diverse immigrant experiences, can basically, they're going to end up creating a lot of very unique dreams and goals for these students. So we're going to take a look, this is a little bit of a depiction of what immigration has been like historically, just to give a little bit of context, but in modern times it looks a little bit more like this. So this is a scene from a graphic novel called American Born Chinese, where the protagonist is basically a Chinese American student, and he's just meeting the other Chinese American student who's come to his school, and the other Chinese American student is a little less has experienced a little less acculturation. He's speaking to the protagonist in Mandarin, and the protagonist responds, "Speak English, you're in America." So you can see, from this little vignette that the experiences of acculturation can be extremely difficult. But moving on to the dreams, moving on to the aspirations these students have, which have come to light in my research, I think that the processes of decision making these students go through can often be very different based off the personal identities that these students have, what interests them specifically. However, the immigrant experiences that they share define a common set of values for them, and their cultural experiences define a common set of values. For example, the difficulty of immigration has led a lot of them to value financial stability, or having the ability to support one's family. And then the cultural concept of filial piety is something a lot of them have felt, and which has been instilled in them. So you'll notice that in their decision making, they talk about giving back to their community or their family as they grow up. And in addition to that, I've noticed that they have a developing relationship with modern American society in a way that I feel like previous generations of immigrants haven't necessarily had the chance to go through, because the relationship there is increasingly complex, where they're aware of these stereotypes and ideas that society has for them, like the myth of the model minority, but the relationship is becoming increasingly public, and students are increasingly being involved in service and social justice. But I'm sure that at this point you have this burning question in mind: why just Chinese American students? Chinese American students are just one piece of this larger picture, and there's a ton of diversity that's really hard to tackle within the Asian American demographic, within that umbrella. There's a huge amount of socioeconomic diversity, there's a huge amount of diversity in terms of the educational experiences each family has had, there's a huge amount of diversity in terms of simply how much each family makes per year. And then there's those cultural differences too. So it's difficult to tackle this Asian American group as a whole, but what I'd like to leave you with is this idea of, even though it's difficult to understand immigration, even though this group is going to be increasingly prevalent in society as time goes on, we have to make that effort. We have to spend the time to become accustomed and to learn more about their dreams, because that's what connects us to each other. Without that, we're going to face a society that's ever more split. So, thank you.